Okay, I think we can probably start now. Welcome everyone. My name is Matt from the Boston Anarchist Bookfair Collective, and we're really excited to have our book fair this weekend, November 1st and November 2nd, this Saturday and Sunday. If you're interested in learning more about the book fair, we have a website, all the info is on there, the full vendors list, workshops, all happening Saturday and Sunday. It's Boston Anarchist Bookfair.org, and I'll probably remind everyone about that a little bit later in the event too. Um, the Boston Anarchist Book Fair will be at the Cambridge Community Center, and we're hosting a celebration of anarchism in its many forms: authors, publishers, organizers, punks, queers, abolitionists, and accomplices of all kinds come through for one of the longest running anarchist book fairs on the East Coast. And again, our full list of vendors and schedule of workshops can be found online at bostonanarchistbookfair.org. Um, before I introduce Kelly Hayes, our special guest tonight, who we're celebrating this amazing new book, Read This When Things Fall Apart, which I'll also be reminding everyone about throughout the event. I want to give a big shout out and thank you to AK Press for helping to make this happen. They're behind the scenes doing all the tech, which I'm very grateful for. So thank you to AK Press. And I just wanted to say, for people who aren't familiar with AK Press, they're an amazing worker-run anarchist collective that has been publishing and distributing radical books and other media to expand minds and change worlds since 1990. And AK Press will also have a table at the Boston Anarchist Book Fair this weekend. So please check out their table if you are in Boston. And I've been told that they're going to have plenty of copies of Kelly's book. So you can also check them out at akpress.org, where you can also order a copy of the book. Um, so yeah, we are here to help launch Read This When Things Fall Apart, Letters to Activists in Crisis, edited by Kelly Hayes, who is here with us this evening. And before I introduce Kelly, I watched the official book launch that Haymarket Books did last night, and I highly recommend watching that conversation with three of the contributors to this book. And I really appreciated something you said, Kelly, about gratitude, and I just want to express my gratitude to you for being part of the Boston Anarchist Book Fair this year and helping us celebrate the launch of your book. So Kelly Hayes is a proud Menominee writer and organizer living and struggling in Chicago. They are also the host of Truth Out's podcast, Movement Memos. And in addition to co-editing this brand new book, Read This When Things Fall Apart, Kelly is the co-author of Let This Radicalize You with Miriam Kaba. So please check that book out too. And Kelly is going to tell us about the book and do a quick reading from it, and then we'll open it up to a discussion. And if you have any questions, start thinking about that, and we'll give you a prompt later to put questions in the chat. So without further ado, please welcome Kelly Hayes.
Thank you so much. Um, oh, thank you everyone for welcoming me into this space and into this conversation. I appreciate your time and your interest in this book. Read This When Things Fall Apart is a book that easily could have been a zine. When I brought up the idea for this project to some of my friends and co-strugglers, enough people were interested that I knew it would be something, but I didn't know how many people would have the capacity or the inspiration to see it through. I thought if only a few of us pursued it, we would make a great zine. Ultimately, 20 of us pursued it, and as those contributions came rolling in, it became clear we had a book on our hands. It's a strange book and a very personal one. It feels more like a project I organized than a book I edited, even though it's both of those things. In some ways, it feels to me like a spiritual sequel to Let This Radicalize You. which Miriam Kappa and I wrote for newer organizers. This book does have a letter to newer organizers that was written by Miriam Kappa because beginning can be its own challenge or crisis, especially right now. But for the most part, this book is a care package for people who are down in it, encountering the setbacks, heartbreaks, defeats, and disasters that are part of movement work and that are part of this catastrophic moment in history. Each of these letters is a message to someone experiencing a kind of crisis the letter's author has experienced and spent a lot of time thinking about. It's an offering, like an outstretched hand to someone trying to follow you up an embankment. Sometimes it's a reflection on how the author muddled through the kind of crisis they're addressing and moved forward. Sometimes it's a reframe or a bit of analysis that might help someone figure out their next right move. Some letters are all of those things. The table of contents reads like a crisis directory, pointing readers to letters that address a variety of crises they may be facing. And that kind of offering felt very important to me right now. This book is something we can turn to when we don't know what to do with it all. And there are a lot of days like that in these times where we don't know where to put what we're feeling or what we're supposed to do next. We all know that burnout grinds people out of our movements on a regular basis. And burnout is basically exhaustion plus moral injury. It's what happens when we overextend ourselves and our boundaries are crossed by us or by other people. Complete and utter exhaustion, compounded by grief, disappointment, or a sense of betrayal, can be really hard to come back from. So, we wanted to make this care package that might give people another resource for processing their experiences and feeling supported, or provide a tool or a framework to help them discuss what they're dealing with. We wanted to help people stay in our movements and, in some cases, stay in this world because despair isn't just toxic for our movements, it's also potentially fatal. And I think too many of us have seen that. So this book came from a very loving place, and it's written very informally as a bundle of letters. And I think that's important right now to make things that feel personal and human in dehumanizing times. Letter writing is a movement tradition that spans generations and continents, and it's also a very human, very personal way of connecting with other people and communicating across the divides that are imposed upon us. Anyone who's ever had an imprisoned pen pal understands that power and knows how those letters can stand in contrast to so many of the stripped down communications in our lives, where brevity is prioritized or where norms governed by algorithms shape our habits. I feel like the shape this book took as a bundle of letters is a rejection of norms and technologies that debase and devalue human expression and human relationships. And it's a call for us to reach for each other in very sincere and personal ways. I hope that people read this book and feel more inspired to write their own letters, make their own zines, and create their own idea and knowledge sharing projects. This book is an act of collective care, and I hope it inspires and facilitates acts of collective care. I'm not an academic, and I don't write like an academic. And while I hold the work of my friends in academia in really high regard, I think it's very useful and important to also make things that don't have that feel. And I think that's true of both this book and Let This Radicalize You, both of which I feel have the potential to be really helpful to people in this moment. And I say that as someone who believes that a big part of what I have to offer in this moment is that I like making things. And I love working in concert with other people to make things that are potentially meaningful and helpful. With Let This Radicalize You, I worked with Miriam Kaba and all of the amazing people we interviewed. And with this book, I worked with 19 other people who wrote and thought alongside me about how to shape letters that might be helpful to people who are in the thick of struggle and grieving, or freaking the fuck out, or fed up and wanting to quit, or just really unsure how to keep going. And it really felt like I was working with my friends to make a care kit or a care package for people on the front lines. That was a heartening and beautiful process, even though there's a lot of pain in some of these letters. I was so grateful for people's vulnerability, for their wisdom, and for their generosity in sharing their experience and their hearts in this way. It was a powerful reminder that I have a lot of amazing people in my life and that I am so lucky to be in the struggle with these folks and so lucky to build things with them. Now, before we move into questions, I want to share an excerpt with you from a letter I wrote for the book. I wrote the first and last letters in the book, and I'm going to read from the last letter today, which is about being fed up and wanting to abandon movement work. The excerpt reads, juggling the demands of capitalism, the needs of our loved ones, and the work of movements can be overwhelming. We can become dysregulated, heavily activated, prone to conflict. We can become confused about when it's time to ask questions and when it's time to fight. We may assume too much about what other people want or believe or where they're coming from. We may reenact old patterns tied to old traumas that have nothing to do with the moment at hand. Or we can find ourselves on the receiving end of those behaviors. In the worst case, we can become part of a dynamic where everyone involved is projecting, assuming, and acting defensively, creating a continuum of hurt, angst, and harm that expands to fill any space we occupy together. Sometimes we lack the tools we need to address these dynamics before they unravel groups and relationships. Sometimes people are not interested in mediation or difficult conversations because they are steeped in their convictions about what's right and what should happen next. Sometimes people have changed or perhaps revealed their true character, and they are not people we can trust or build with any longer. However it happens, sometimes what binds us is undone and our connections are severed. Starting over from this position can lead us to question everything. A friend whose group came undone once told me that she felt like she had failed at the most important thing in her life. I think a lot of activists who have experienced the collapse of their movement home can identify with that feeling. In my own work, I have experienced the loss of groups, communities, and relationships that had shaped my life. I have been left utterly heartsick, unable to imagine how I would reconstitute my efforts, and unsure I even wanted to. In fact, there was a time when I was convinced I wanted out. I even tried to walk away. I was embittered. People I trusted had let me down, and if I'm honest, I felt humanity itself had let me down. Amid the repression of activists and the broader society's indifference to war, which had become background noise in this country, and the normalization of so much cruelty and violence, I had little hope for the future. My community was in disarray. Our belief in each other, which had always sustained during the hard times, had seemingly evaporated. I can remember thinking, good luck, humanity, as I turned my attention to myself and focused on repairing my own life, a life that had fallen apart in many ways, while I devoted myself to political matters. During my temporary breakup with social change, I worked on myself. I did things I should have been doing all along, like getting therapy and medical care and expressing myself artistically. I took up photography, which wound up being critically important to my emotional recovery. Taking photos as a hobby meant I could wander around Chicago whenever I had time and become fascinated with a puddle, a leaf, or some glitter on the sidewalk. I could focus on trying to capture what was special about anything around me that struck me as beautiful. And in so doing, I slowly fell in love with the world again. My bitterness began to recede. It was as though my bones had been broken and were knitting back together. Like a person who swears they'll never love again after a horrific breakup, I'd sworn off fighting for the world I was becoming enamored with again, and sworn off fighting for other people, but that rigidity was beginning to ease. Eventually, old friends began to reach out. The Occupy movement was kicking off nationwide, and there was a hub in our city. Come down here, you have to see this, they would say. I brushed off these invitations, saying I wasn't interested in protest, but I was interested. I was simply unwilling. I was protecting myself. I was resisting the possibility of being hurt again. I was resisting the possibility of losing myself again. We need you down here, my friend said. I declined again and again until one day I didn't. I saw something on social media that made me angry, an act of abuse against a crowd, the kind of indignity that protesters so often experience, and I got on a train. I headed downtown. When I joined the fray, I felt like I was stepping back into myself, back into hope, back into possibility. I hope that you'll want to read the rest of that letter and that you will check out the book. And with that, I would love to dig into a discussion.
Thanks so much, Kelly. And if anyone is just joining us or missed the introduction, this is Kelly Hayes, and that was from the final letter of Read This When Things Fall Apart, Letters to Activists in Crisis. And the book is out this coming week from AK Press, who are co-hosting this virtual book launch. So I was just going to ask you a couple of questions, and then we can open it up to everyone else that's tuned in tonight. If you have a question for Kelly, please put it in the chat, and we can have a really good conversation while we're all here together. So the first question that I was just going to throw out there was, yeah, again, this book is going to be out in the world. It is in some ways. Again, it'll be at the Boston Anarchist Bookfair this weekend at the AK Press table. And I was just wondering, in this current moment, where there are multiple seemingly infinite crises affecting activists here in the US and all over the world. I was wondering if you could share more about the current struggle in Chicago, where you live, against the crisis of ICE profiling and disappearing your neighbors and attacking your city. And for people tuning in who haven't been following this closely, can you just give us some updates about what has been happening and where things are at now? And also with the book, how do you think the book, Read This When Things Fall Apart, can serve as a resource both for you and other organizers in Chicago for the struggle ahead?
Thank you so much for this question. So, in Chicagoland, we are experiencing an onslaught, a political project of the Trump administration that ICE has dubbed Operation Midway Blitz. More than 3,000 people across Chicagoland, which is what we call Chicago and its surrounding areas, have been kidnapped by ICE, and many of them have been disappeared into the system. Attorneys are unable to locate people in many cases, and the government is not telling advocates where people are, where they're winding up, and is not even pretending when questioned in court that these people are experiencing anything like safe or sanitary conditions. Not that there is any humane way to kidnap, cage, imprison, or deport people. But the opaqueness of what's happening does make it even harder for families and lawyers to fight for our neighbors or receive any measure of comfort amid what's happening. There is a lot of resistance on the ground here. There is a network of community defense and rapid response groups around Chicago that are mobilizing to track and document what ICE is doing, and when possible, to get in the way and make that work harder. It's not a fair fight, and I don't want to over romanticize anything because we are taking heavy losses all the time, and there's a lot that we can't do. But I have never been prouder of this city or of the communities I struggle with. When ICE hits my community, so many of us take to the streets, as we did today, following up on every sighting, blowing our whistles whenever we spot them, and trying to make these fuckers miserable and less effective. Sometimes people get arrested for doing that work. Sometimes they have guns pointed at them or get tear gassed, but people are not backing down. ICE has tear gassed people in at least 6 residential neighborhoods in Chicago, but this has not stopped people from forming a crowd and getting loud when ICE shows up on their block or while they're going about their day. We are more tightly bound together in this moment by our shared desire to defend our neighbors and our communities. And even though we are injured by the wounds and losses that we and our neighbors are experiencing, there are ways in which we are building more strength and more power and a greater sense of fellowship and love in these streets. Um, they wanted to depict Chicago as a war zone, so they are waging a war on us. But I think I think Chicagoans are reaching for each other in ways that are bringing out the best in us. Our love, our ferocity, um, our camaraderie. I also want to give a shout out to everyone who has been holding it down at the Broadview Detention Center, which is outside the city, but it's the primary processing hub for the violence that ICE is inflicting right now. I was a part of those protests for weeks until I got injured during a really violent attack by ICE. As a disabled person, I really needed to prioritize recovering from that injury. And so I pivoted from primarily focusing on frontline protest and attempted disruptions at Broadview to rapid response work. That's been a good move for me, but I know how challenging it's been for people who have continued to maintain a presence at Broadview, which is a really complicated situation. And I just want to honor what those folks have brought and have continued to bring to the struggle. In terms of what this book brings to this particular moment, this is a really weird and hard time to launch a book because it's a really hard time to think about anything else. Um, you know, I was late in getting today's episode of the podcast turned in at Truth Out because, it was like, here's the deadline closing in, and then here's my phone busting off with these alerts, and ICE is back in the neighborhood, and it's just not even a question mark. I'm very lucky to have a job where I can tell them, sorry, I might blow this deadline. I gotta get out in the streets with folks because ICE is here again, and we have to put up the fight in every way that we can. And really, the only thing that gives me any space in my brain at all to talk about a book and promote that book right now is that I believe this book is going to be helpful to us. And when I say us, I mean me too, because, this obviously isn't a book that I wrote. This isn't all knowledge that exists in my head or understanding that exists in my head. This is a project aimed at collective survival and collective liberation that includes the wisdom and experience of a bunch of my co-strugglers. And I have been helped by it. I was helped by it as we worked on these letters together. I've been helped by it as I've returned to them. And I know that as we continue to navigate these crises, I'm going to continue to return to some of these words to help coax myself through. And I think that a number of these letters are going to have that importance to people because I think some of the folks who wrote for this project really gave us something urgent, but also timeless in terms of what it means to be and stay human and ground ourselves in the face of things we should never have to contemplate. And I think that's a gift that I want to make sure we pass around between us right now.
Thank you. Yeah, I really liked what you said last night during the Haymarket Books launch. That this is a book that you couldn't write alone, and that really no one could write alone, right? Because there's 20 contributors, yeah, sharing all this wisdom from their organizing experience. I guess I wanted to ask you one more question before we open it up. to the Q&A. And again, if you have a question and you're tuned in either here on Zoom or YouTube, put your question in the comment and we'll be opening it up soon. Um, for people planning on attending our book fair in Boston this weekend, um, what are some other new or classic books or zines that you would recommend that we check out and maybe start study groups around after the book fair?
I think this is a really good time to read Theory of Water, Anishinaabe Maps to the Times Ahead by Leanne Budasumase Simpson. I think when everything is happening really fast, it can be helpful to read books that help us slow down and contemplate natural processes and how those rhythms and cycles relate to how we move in the world. The idea of centering, for example, which sounds a bit like centering, but is spelled Sintering. Centering is a natural process. It's a way in which snowflakes reconfigure themselves when they land and connect with other snowflakes. Their edges transform and bond to the snowflakes they connect with. If you live in a place where it snows, you know that you're much better off shoveling snow right away because if you wait, the snow sinters, it becomes much harder to move. And I think it's important to think about that kind of process and the ways we can round or transform our edges to bond ourselves together and become harder to move. I also love how Leanne reminds us to think about all of the ways that life is already happening and about what it means to weave ourselves and our visions into that fabric of life rather than projecting ourselves and our desires over everything in our path. I also want to give a shout out to Miriam Kaba, who makes great zines. I think this is a great time to revisit her zine on tear gas and her zine White People Hate Protest about how unpopular some of the historic protests that are widely celebrated today were back in their day. I think it's important to remember the difference between the retroactive support people declare for past movements and the reality of how public opinion functioned in those times. Because we need to remember that public opinion is not our compass. It can be a resource, but it's also malleable and something that we can seek to shape. We are inviting people to move in transformative directions with us. That's not simple or easy. And it is about moving, inviting, and organizing people rather than expecting easy agreement or feeling restricted by a lack of social consensus. Social consensus is built, and we have to be builders.
That's great. I guess we do have some questions in the chat that people have added, so we can open things up. And before that, I just want to mention again, if you're in the Boston area this weekend, all the info for the book fair is at bostonanarchistbookfair.org. And again, if you're interested in getting your own copy of this amazing new book, AK Press will have a table at the book fair, and you can get it there. And actually, I just wanted to ask you really quick, Kelly. I know there's an amazing bookstore in Chicago that has been doing pre-orders of your book. Is that right for people in the Chicago area that want to pick it up?
Absolutely. And anyone can pre-order through Pilsen Community Books. They will send a book to you. It is my favorite bookstore in Chicago. It is the only worker-owned like bookstore cooperative in Chicago. And there's still a few days to order through either AK or Pilsen Community Books to get the extra letter that I wrote for people who pre-order through AK or through Pilsen Community Books. Love you, Pilsen Community Books.
Yes. Yeah, it's such a great store. And that's so sweet that there's an extra letter from you for people who order in advance. Okay, so we have a couple of questions. We have a question from Heather who asks, in this day and age, it can be very easy for information about one's activist actions particularly those marked as criminal, to get back to their employer and potentially impact their employment. Do you have any advice for avoiding these types of situations or for navigating when they happen?
So I move with a lot of personal advantage on that front, and I want to name that because, I work for Truth Out. I have two J jobs. I work for Truth Out and I make the podcast and sometimes write for Truth Out. And I have a newsletter called Organizing My Thoughts. And those are my two sources of income. And obviously, I don't have to worry about me getting mad at me for the newsletter. And Truth Out has always known who I am. They hired the person that I am. In fact, my old manager, who no longer works at Truth Out, moved on some years ago, but we were good friends, and we had gone to the same protest one night, and I had helped organize that protest. So when it spontaneously turned into a march and everyone kind of marched away, I had to stay behind and dismantle the props and different things that we had arranged. And so I was thinking I was missing the march, and I got in a car with my manager and some other friends, and we were driving home, and then we got stopped on Lakeshore Drive because the march had taken Lakeshore Drive. And my manager saw me like unbuckling my seatbelt and was like, "You're not jumping out. Of course you're jumping out of the car." And as I like disappeared into the distance, he was just like, "Do you need me to tell everyone you're not coming in tomorrow?" And it's like, "Probably. I think I'm going to jail." And so yeah, I've had that good fortune that they really respect what I do and what I have to do. And I recognize that most of us are not moving from that position. Doxing is a huge problem right now. I would recommend that everyone do what they can to defend their personal information. I use a service called Delete Me to remove my personal information from the internet, from like data broker sites and whatnot. There are kits and instructions to do that kind of thing manually. But if you can afford a service to do it, or if you can get an organization to pay for that service, I highly recommend it because it's a lot to keep up with on your own. And I personally couldn't do it. Um, I got that service a few years ago after having some scary things happen in my life. And so I think it's important for all of us, whether we have an understanding boss or not, to do what we can to make it harder to dox us. In terms of preventing our employers from getting that information that can hurt us, more of us need to mask at protests, fam. It's the right, smart thing to do on every level. In addition to protecting ourselves from COVID-19 and other health threats, um, it helps us minimize doxing and it helps us avoid criminalization. And I don't think people are always thinking about that in turn as it's like I think too often people think of criminalization as a function of what they actually do or don't do. And we should be way past thinking in those terms in these times, right? When I've been outside Broadview and I see them up on the roof with their telephoto lens trying to get photos of the crowd, um, I don't think they're just trying to capture the people who might have theoretically thrown something back at an ICE agent or something. I think they're looking for anyone whose identity they can grab onto and then maybe attach some kind of charge to or accusation to at some point. So I think we need to be really thoughtful about that, protecting our identities when we can. And I also just want to mention that as someone who documents movements, it also makes it safer for me to do my job in a responsible way when people are masked. There's so many important photos that I've taken of like important things happening that I haven't felt okay about sharing publicly in recent months because I'm not trying to put somebody's face out there in a way that might do exactly what you're describing, get them fired, worsen their criminalization prospects, get them doxxed and harassed. Like, I don't want that for people. And so I'm trying to avoid that. And so when you cover your face, you're also helping people who are trying to document the movement and tell our stories do that responsibly and in ways that don't put people at risk. So masking is it's the first easiest thing I think we can all do. And yeah, beyond that, I know it's rough out there. I mean, this is fucking fascism, right? The surveillance is off the charts. And in a lot of ways, you know, fascist ideology is dominant right now. Um, if people lost their jobs for their reactions to Charlie Kirk's death, and that was some of the things people got fired and saw major consequences for were mind-blowing to me. Really mundane things that people said, things that were just like that people saw consequences for simply quoting that man in the aftermath of his death. And so this is a really fucked up time in terms of consequences. I think anything we can anonymize, it's worth doing. If you haven't already put your name publicly on a bunch of things politically, uh, probably wise not to do that. There are people like me who've been out there in public for a long time, and there is nothing to be done. Like I am fully seen in what I'm doing, but that's not everyone. And so a lot of you still have some room to think about how public you want to be about the different moves you make. And yeah, I think we can all be thoughtful together and continue to exercise best practices and also, talk about best practices at the events we organize. Like we can ask people to mask as a matter of safety, and also remind people that this will help this will help prevent doxing for everyone. This will help make it harder to isolate people. And it will also make it easier for people to responsibly capture images of the event we're putting on and tell the story of this moment because they're not going to feel like they might be getting us doxxed or fired. So yeah, these are practices we can talk about collectively too in ways that will help create more collective safety.
Thank you. Yeah. I have another question in the chat. And again, if you're tuning in and you have a question, please submit it in the comments. Flora asks, are you seeing any overlap between people attending the No Kings protests and people who are active in the fight against ICE in Chicagoland?
Absolutely. I know there's a stereotype about who those events are for. And those people that the stereotype exists around, they're there too. There are people who are just, liberals who show up for the big photo op moments. Those people exist. But yeah, a lot of people who do neighborhood patrol headed downtown for that event. In my area, there were very real conversations about who was stand behind because we couldn't leave the neighborhood unpatrolled. And, like if we all headed downtown for the same event with millions of people and left all of our neighborhoods without rapid responders, that would be fucked up. So we actually had to have conversations about who would still be here. And I was one of the people that wasn't downtown that day because I had other commitments. But if I didn't have that other commitment, I too would have been down there and I would have brought some form a crowd and get loud scenes and been handing them out to people and trying to make meaningful invitations. I would have been trying to use that moment as an inroad, to ongoing political projects that I think are important. Um, I think these moments, while flawed, can be useful, and I think it's up to us to make use of the things that happen around us, right? Opportunities are often what we make of them. And in my neighborhood, there is a annual arts event that is like an art fair festival in the streets. And there've been a lot of important political moments there over the years. And it's not even a politically intended event, but it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity when a lot of people who are going to be open to these ideas or moved by a visual spectacle are in the same place. And so I think it's important to approach moments like No Kings from a strategic perspective. Like what can we move from this? What can we take from this? What can we do with this? And and we all have our critiques. In my city, Governor J.B. Pritzker was out front at the No Kings March. Governor J.B. Pritzker, who's also, verbally sparring with Trump a lot and, waging various court battles against the deployment of the National Guard, um, also has the state police outside the Broadview facility. And we were getting our asses kicked on the regular by ICE outside that facility. And then the state police took over managing crowd control outside of that facility, which also resulted in a lot of violence against protesters. And having the statees there to do that is actually part of the state's legal maneuvering. They're saying that, well, you can't possibly argue that you need the National Guard because look, the state of Illinois has completely managed the situation at Broadview. But what does that management consist of? It consists of doing crowd control for ICE, which on a legal level arguably violates the Trust Act, which in Illinois is something that we have that prevents our law enforcement from entangling with ICE and cooperating with ICE. But putting that bullshit aside, putting the legality aside, even, we're talking about the morality of people who are trying to get in the way of the violence we all agree should not be happening here. And bringing down the violence of the state on those people as a kind of strategy, and it's like it's a chess game or something, and it's like these are moral people in the streets who've been hit with batons. Like that's not fucking okay. And I have feelings about that man being at the front of that march. And also, this is a really complex moment. And I know someone in my life, a clinician who I see, um, who I showed up for an appointment late with one day, and I was getting kind of a look about kind of some attitude about being late. And I had to explain that I was late because I had to go home to decontaminate because I'd been tear gassed. And this person was moved by that. And we got into a discussion I didn't expect having with someone who was providing me care in a clinical setting. And that discussion continued over time because, for one thing, I'm an organizer and I'm going to pursue that kind of conversation when that kind of opening happens. And I gave this person a copy of Let This Radicalize You. And I gave them an early copy of Read This When Things Fall Apart. And the week before No Kings, I asked them if they had any exciting plans for the weekend. And they said that they and a friend were considering going to the march. And I'll tell you, that weekend, I was really stoked at the thought this might happen, that this person might take a step, into something that felt more active for them, something that might be a beginning. And they did. They went to the march. And, I think that moments that make people feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves, sometimes they can be illusory, right? Sometimes people can feel like, oh, I did something, and then go back to whatever. Sometimes it can really be the beginning of finding their way. And I think it's up to us as organizers to help people make it the latter.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And a lot of your answering the question around No Kings made me kind of think of the Occupy movement too, which you brought up in that final letter in the book that you shared. And I think during that moment too, a lot of people were dismissive of the Occupy movement, especially initially, right? And then in like certain cities like Philadelphia, where I was living at the time, like there were anarchists that were there from the very beginning and as part of the organizing and kind of saw it as like this opportunity to organize and kind of like push it in new directions and kind of expanding like the political imagination around it.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely. I think Occupy is it was shit on by a lot of people at the time. And that's so leftist also. Like it's like, oh, look at all these people who want to do something. What a bunch of assholes. Like that's
exactly.
so left of us. And y'all, like to me, when I went down there, I saw these circles of young people sitting on the pavement talking about socialism, talking about anarchism at a time when the left barely had a fucking pulse in this country. And if you don't see opportunity in that, then I don't know what to tell you. You know, we're usually at the beginning of anything that turns into something dealing with raw political will. People who are turned all the way up and don't know necessarily what they're supposed to do with that. And so you have to meet people in that place. And here in Chicago, we were also helped by the fact that Rahm Emanuel made an incredible political miscalculation when it came to Occupy Chicago. He should have let us have a fucking encampment. We tried to take an encampment twice. We tried to do it in October. Like, if he had just let us take the damn plaza, um, not only would we have been completely consumed by the work of maintaining a can encampment, which it's all consuming, and no one really has all the tools they need on a protracted timeline to sustain all of the trappings of care and justice and all the things in that kind of setting. But moving into a Chicago winter, oh my God, we would have kicked our own asses before we eventually got cleared out of there. But we took 300 arrests trying, and it was clear this isn't going to happen. And so we became this modular giant crew of people who were turned all the way up and didn't necessarily have a plan. So wherever people around the city did have a plan, like in these anti-austerity struggles in the neighborhoods, we just went there. It's like, oh, you're fighting for the clinics. Suddenly, all these motherfuckers have your back. Like, oh, you're the teachers union and you want to go on strike. We are all behind you. And we brought all of this energy and all of these young people and all of this militancy to a lot of anti-austerity struggles, to a lot of fights for justice around the city. And I think really backed up the teachers union in a way that was deeply important to the militancy of the 2012 strike. And I mean, you look to the trajectory of the teachers union and to the struggle against austerity, the struggle for the mental health clinics, like all of this is so crucial to where we are now in terms of having Brandon Johnson in office. And, anyone who lives here may have their critiques of the Johnson administration, but no one can deny the importance of having a progressive mayor in Chicago right now who is willing to stand up to Donald Trump. And I don't think we have that without that trajectory that began in 2011 with a collaboration between a bunch of newly activated folks who maybe didn't know what the fuck they were doing and a bunch of grassroots organizers in their communities fighting for their schools, fighting for their clinics, and throwing down alongside people who were showing up in imperfect ways.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. I also have a memory of coming to Chicago in 2012 for the May Day protest and kind of sticking around for a little while before the big summit against the NATO summit and the massive mobilization against NATO in May of 2012. And I think there was a people summit kind of in between those points that was sort of organized by the Occupy movement. So yeah, it's really interesting to think about that sort of timeline between then and now. We have another question I wanted to share from the chat. How can you help keep a collective or group of organizers together when everyone in your group is worn down and overwhelmed by the work and feeling the impacts of fascism in their personal lives? And how can we stay level-headed in our attempts at being safe and secure together without getting paranoid?
This is such an important question. Um, I think the first thing is you absolutely have to make space to feel something else. And that's really hard. Um, for me, I feel better when I'm taking action, than I do when I'm not. Like, I mean, I'm living with the enormity of 3,000 people across Chicagoland having been kidnapped in recent weeks. And when I'm sitting here in this chair not doing something about that, that's harder than when I'm out in the street doing something about it. So sometimes it's hard to want to stop doing something about it. It's hard to want to do anything with the energy that I have that doesn't feel productive, that doesn't feel constructive, that doesn't feel part of that. And it's not a bad thing to pour a lot of ourselves into that sense of calling and the pursuit of justice. I wish more people were on that page. And also, we need to know when to purposefully and intentionally downshift and to say, actually, I need to spend some time feeling this other thing even if it feels unnatural to move from this place of activation and focus into a place of we're going to be silly for a while here, guys, because we need this silly energy. Or, we're going to make space for our grief and our pain and the fact that we're messy right now. Or to name some of the hurts that are happening. Um, I co-facilitate a group called Understory, and it's a spiritual and emotional support group for activists. And I almost missed a session a couple weeks ago because I was out in the street, and then something happened in the street. Someone said something that upset me, and I felt myself overreacting. There was a negative action reaction that was appropriate, and what I was feeling was like way above it. And I was like, okay, okay. I'm mad that this person said this, but I'm also mad about these abductions. I'm mad that we're getting most of rapid response when you're responding to an alert about an abduction in process is usually getting there and then documenting the thing that already happened that you don't get to do anything about. And that's hard. That wears on your soul and that makes you angry. And oftentimes we pour our anger out at people who will actually care that we're mad because we don't get to punish the people who are actually hurting us the most. So we have to be able to recognize that and create a space to actually pour that stuff out in the company of other people. So I was like, you know what, fuck it. I need to go to Understory. So I went to the support group and I talked to the group, and Tanuja Jagernoff, my co-facilitator, still facilitated the whole thing. But I got to participate. And by the end of it, my nervous system was just completely reset. I was just completely in a calm and reasonable place of having, been heard and having people kind of witnessed where I was at, why I was in that place, what I'd caught myself doing, what I wanted to do instead. And I was actually able to go to this person who I love and be like, this is why I was upset. Like you said this thing, and here's how I feel about it, and here's what I think is fair and what I think is unfair. And we worked through it in a way that I couldn't have if I had tried to push through in that super activated place. Um, and so I think we need to make space for the fullness of our humanity, and I think we need to do more of that, treat less of that as like personal responsibility and recognize that it has to be part of the movement work. It has to be part of the movement work. And, Understory is a small project. Um, and but Tanuja and I are very available to anyone who wants to talk about how to formulate something like this for your community. For us, it was built on relationships. Like anyone who has a relationship to anyone involved in it can be invited. And it's a tight-knit crew, and people are very comfortable opening up about what we're going through and what we're feeling and how much all of this sucks, and also finding ways to laugh together about what sucks and and what our hopes are, and really talk about hope and grief and intention. And I think that that is so important. At the end of every session, we talk about hope, grief, and intention. And, either people don't have to name things out loud, but people are invited to name out loud um, a hope, a grief, or intention that they're carrying into the new week. And sometimes that declaration can be really meaningful. And just really asking people how the fuck they're doing and welcoming an honest answer can be a transformative thing, because we start each session with that check-in that's basically just kind of a how the hell is everyone doing? What do you need to air out right now? And someone told Tanuja and I early in the project that this was the only time during their week that anyone asked them how they were doing and really welcomed an honest answer. We need more of that. One of the rapid response groups that I'm connected with has been hosting regular sort of somatic healing exercise times where people can gather and do some healing practices and some grounding together. A lot of people who should probably avail themselves of that don't, but there are people attending. It is available. And I have hope that that'll continue to grow. And tomorrow night, my friend Maya Shenwar and I are hosting something we call Struggle Hour. um, it's like happy hour, but we're not happy because we're leftists. And it's for Chicago activists and organizers to get together and drink and eat pizza and have some fellowship and talk about what the fuck's going on. And tomorrow's version is the Halloween edition. So people will also be wearing costumes and maybe doing some karaoke. And it feels ridiculous to be organizing something like that right now. and also really, really necessary because we do need to laugh and we do need to be silly and we do need to make space to remember all the parts of ourselves amid all of this. So I would say keep creating spaces and opportunities for that, for the wholeness of who we are. We don't work for our movements, we constitute our movements. So if we are unwell, if we are run down, that is the state that our movements are in. So we have to nurture ourselves and each other if we want our movements to be strong.
I really appreciate that. And I really appreciated the event last night with the three contributors to the book. Read this when things fall apart. How you were basically just like, these are my like friends that I've invited, and it seems like, yeah, just everything you're saying is very much connected to like what's in the book, and how it's basically these friends of yours that you've invited to share their letters and sharing their wisdom to for activists in this moment of fascism, as you said earlier. And I've been thinking about that a lot. There's the importance of just showing up for your friends in this moment. And I just wanted to show, I got this cute sticker that a friend of mine sent. I don't know if you can see it, but it's about loving your friends and fighting fascism. So
I love that.
yeah, I just think this book is going to be such an important resource for people, for those reminders too. Um, yeah, and as AK Press has encouraged people in the chat, if you have more questions, we do have one more that I'll put out there, and then if we don't have more coming in, we can start wrapping things up. But Tammy in the chat says, "Thanks, Kelly, for all you do and for mentioning masking. Do you have any advice for those of us in the disabled community who keep getting pushed aside by organizers who do not take our concerns seriously and don't want to have mask mandatory events? I want to have faith in the movement, but when I see radical orgs not upholding disability justice, I really lose hope."
Thank you for that question. And I think it's something a lot of us are grappling with. Um, it's it's really hard. I when I organize events locally, they are masked events or they're outside. And I understand that, like if sometimes we're having a meal or we're having a gathering in a backyard setting, and some people think like that's not cool if everyone's not masked. And I understand where people are coming from. And it's really tough to balance the fact that a lot of people are not going to show up for certain things under certain conditions. And, folks kind of differing needs around this stuff. My personal rule for indoor events specifically is that we mask. Unless you're putting food or drink in your mouth, you've got a mask on. And I bring high quality masks so that people have the KN95 or the N95 there to put on. I think providing things is important. But this is such a tough time in terms of navigating these collective practices. As I mentioned, with actions, I think it really helps to discuss the full spectrum of reasons that masking makes sense. That yes, this is about COVID safety. This is also about doxing. This is also about protecting people from criminalization. This is also about being able to document our actions in meaningful ways. Um, but I think that this is a really challenging time, and it's always really a challenging time around disability justice, right? It's always been, and it's always been a challenging time for a number of our communities in terms of what doesn't get taken seriously. As a Native person, uh, I have long had a lot of resentments around the ways in which Native struggle and the history of genocide get invisibilized or get just named in really empty and useless ways. I'm not a big fan of land acknowledgements. I'm one of those natives who's like, so you stole something. Like, how does this help us? It's like if somebody walked up to me right now and took this drink and was like, I'm just naming that I took this. Like, how does that fucking help me? I think that there are ways that we disappoint each other, and sadly, that we're going to keep disappointing each other. And I think it's a process of nagging, a process of trying to continuously educate each other. It's a process of knowing that we are disappointing creatures, like in so many ways. Um, Bringing any group of people together, particularly right now, like in this moment of mass activation in Chicago, where, I show up to go to ICE patrol, and there are a bunch of people there who are newly activated. And sometimes people are going to say things that I'm just like, oh my God. I thought we worked through this. I thought we knew not to say that. But these folks don't, you know? And if we're building a big enough movement to accomplish any of the things we're going to accomplish, that's going to continuously be the case, right? We're going to continuously run up against the fact that we disappoint each other. And there are things that they don't get. There are things that I don't get. There are ways in which people can be insufferable and ways in which we as leftists are insufferable. And I can't tell you when to draw the line or when you do or don't get to give up on anyone. One of the things that Leah was talking about last night was that as a disability justice activist, they tend to work with other disability justice people, other disabled people, and tend to save their energy for that because their energy is so precious and they really don't have it to spend on spaces where people don't get it and aren't going to work in common cause and aren't going to be on the same page trying to accomplish the same things. I really respect that. I think that's a completely reasonable approach to collective survival. Is dedicating yourself where you feel other people are going to be deeply invested in your survival, in your liberation, and understand what you need them to show up understanding in order to do the work together. That is reasonable. Um, it's not the space I move in personally. Um, I'm also a disabled person, and I'm in a number of other things that lead me into conflict with people, and lead me into disappointment with people. But to do the things that I'm personally trying to do, I have to butt heads with that disappointment sometimes. And I have to figure out the next kind of nimble move that allows me to try to make something good happen in concert with these folks. And that's just about what I think I have to offer and where I can offer it. And I'm not sure where the line is for me in terms of ooh, you don't get it, or you're not working with me to an extent that I can't fuck with this and I can't fuck with you. I can say that in this current context of emergency in Chicago, I haven't found that line yet because what's happening is so massive that I'm going to push through a lot of discomfort. I'm going to push through a lot of disappointment. Not because each and every person who disappoints me deserves that, but because the 3,000 people who have been kidnapped deserve a lot from me right now. So I'm going to do my best to keep showing up in the ways that I think I should and that I think are appropriate um, for that and to do what I can to fight that. But again, I trust your creativity and I respect your autonomy. So whatever you think you have to do to create a space where you can move towards liberation among people who are going to be trying to keep you safe, like I really respect that. And I hope we can all work together to keep creating more and more space where we all feel safe and welcome.
Thanks, Kelly. I was wondering if there was anything else that you wanted to add about for what's happening in Chicago in terms of for those of us outside of Chicagoland, what any like resources that we should know about, projects to support, um, and anything else that you think that people should be aware of what's happening in the struggle there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm gonna quickly pull up a resource. Forgive me for not having this ready, but you asking just made me think of it. So, about a week before all of this started, about a week before Operation Midway Blitz began, um, I called a meeting of activists and organizers who I know from around the city and some of their friends. And it was about 60 of us packed into a room, and I shared a resource that I had stayed up late working on. It's called Mapping Community Defense and Care in Our Neighborhoods. And it is based on work from Interrupting Criminalization about mapping ecosystems of care, but it is a worksheet that is designed to help people map existing networks of care and defense in their neighborhoods. And this was a really important tool for people in those beginning days. People did this worksheet at the group level, at mutual aid hubs, at organizations, at churches. It really helped people map who the players were in their neighborhood, who was already working together, who should be working together, where we align in values with orgs that, we could do some good with, um, where there are maybe divisions that where we can't work with these folks because maybe there's too much carceral shit going on over there, but we can be aware of what services they're providing, and to think about real things that are going to be really important during this time, like how do we resolve conflict in the face of all of this shit? Because conflict, it's always going to happen, and it's going to happen even more so under this kind of pressure. So we have to have a plan. And I think that this tool is something that would really be worth sitting with for folks who are not yet in the full-blown situation that we're in, but preparing, maybe preparing for some of the federal onslaughts that are ahead. I think mapping community defense and care and what that looks like is going to be really important to our collective survival in the coming months and years. I mean, we've got a lot of people that are about to lose SNAP benefits. So, what is the plan locally around that? If we know who provides what, who they provide it to, and on what terms, we can start to look for the gaps and figure out how we can usefully resource people, expand upon what exists, and build what needs to exist. So I would really like to people to think proactively about that kind of mapping. And I also just really want to encourage people to think of simple things that can help give people a role. There's been a lot of talk about like the whistles in Chicago. I can tell you it's huge. I've got one around my neck right now because I was out all morning and afternoon on patrol. It's a big deal when you're walking around scouting for ice or riding in your car and you see a bunch of other people with one of these on. And then you pass close by someone and you kind of point to them and you're like, same team, same team. And you know who to check in with, when you walk up on a space because you're following up on an alert and you can know who to walk up to and say, what have you seen anything? What's going on? What can I do? Um, it's a big deal and it's a small thing, right? Lots of people, individual people have been giving the whistles away. Coffee shops, stores, like people have just been giving these things away like mad. And I can tell you, it was so important. Um, the first day that ICE hit this area real hard, that the streets filled up with hundreds of people, and there were folks out there giving everybody a whistle who didn't have one. And to look around, it was clear that all of these people filling the streets were there for the same reason, and they were united by a purpose and by a simple action that they could take. And and it can also just functionally work. Today in my area, there was at least one situation where ICE agents started to get out of the car and whistles started going off suddenly, and they got right back in and left. They were chased away by whistles. Like that really happened. So I would think about what are the simple ways in that we can give people, into a sense of connection to action. What are the little things people can do? And the little things can help people feel a part of something much larger and be a part of something much larger and do something like chase a couple of ICE agents away. Like there may be people who are in my community who are still in their homes and with their loved ones tonight because of that moment. And this simple act of giving people this little way to participate at the community level made that possible. We still have people among us who are right where they belong because of this level of community participation. So let's think of all the ways that we can invite people into collective action, all the ways that we can see that we're on the same side and be and act and move together in solidarity.
That's so powerful. Thanks for sharing that. I guess before we wrap up, unless anyone does have any more questions they want to put in the chat, I just wanted to remind everyone one final time that the Boston Anarchist Book Fair is happening this Saturday and Sunday, November 1st and 2nd at the Cambridge Community Center. And again, you can find all of the information on our website, bostonanarchistbookfair.org. And there's also information in the chat you'll see about pre-ordering the book, Read This When Things Fall Apart, Letters to Activists in Crisis, both from AK Press and from Pilsen Community Books. Is there anything else that you wanted to share about the book, Kelly, before we wrap up tonight?
I just want to send love to everyone who participated in this process, all of our writers, all of my friends who worked with me on this. Um, most of my projects begin with me asking my friends, is this a good idea? And if people say it is, who wants to do this with me? And in this case, I will never get over how many people showed up and decided, like, yes, let's do this. This is important because I think we did something beautiful together. And I'm honored. I'm honored by their friendship and by their comradeship and by the fact that we get to build things together. So I want to thank them for that. And I also want to thank Sophia Hussein at AK Press, who was also a big part of the creative process with this book. I'm just full of gratitude to get to be part of organizing and making something that I think is going to be useful to us during this moment.
Well, thanks again, and on behalf of the entire Boston Anarchist Book Fair Collective, I want to express our gratitude to you for sharing the celebration of the book, and we're really looking forward to getting our own copies of it at the book fair this weekend. And thank you again to AK Press.
Thanks so much for having me tonight and for hosting this.